No. Wait, please don't click away. Hello, welcome to this video of my reading and writing journey. Sorry for that clickbaity title, but we'll get into what I think. It's subjective, of course, but there's definitely one series that I read more of. So I thought about separating this into two different videos for my reading journey and then my writing journey. But as I started thinking about it and like planning out this video, I think the things just intertwine too much. It's too connected for me to really separate it. So hopefully we can make this concise and not too long. But let's just jump into it and see how it goes. It's the mid-90s. I'm watching Batman reruns, the animated series, Spider-Man animated series, Gargoyles, X-Men, all at my grandma's house. Loving those shows. I'm watching Dragon Ball Z every day after school. And of course, I want to be a cartoonist, right? I loved anything creative whenever I was a kid, and drawing was one of my first passions. I drew Dragon Ball Z characters all the time, but I think even back then, I wanted to be a cartoonist because I wanted to tell the stories that the cartoons were telling. So we go into, I believe, fourth grade, and this is the first book I remember choosing to read for myself, and that is Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, of course. A lot of people in my generation, this is the book that they got their start with as well, and of course, I loved it. I read Harry Potter, then I read The Chamber of Secrets, and then I remember Prisoner of Azkaban was new at the time, and I started to read it, but then one of my friends read Redwall, told me I had to read Redwall. Basically, I dropped Redwall because of their suggestion, and I absolutely loved Redwall. I never finished the third Harry Potter book. I read Redwall, finished it, read other Redwall books. My memory's kind of bad, so I don't remember how many Redwall books I read. I remember it was a bit. Yeah, so Redwall took over for me, and to this day, I have not finished Prisoner of Azkaban or the Harry Potter series. But now we jump into fifth grade. In fifth grade, we had an assignment to write a story using candy bar names that we got. We basically, I think the class had to like pick out between candy bars, and I like different people like picked different candy bars, and you ended up with some somehow or something like that. But I remember I wrote a story about Zagnut, who flew his spaceship through the Milky Way with his dog Zero. And yeah, that was whenever I fell in love with writing, really, and writing stories in general. And as soon as I was done with that, I wrote my very first story. It was basically a Dragon Ball fanfic. I think I called it like Dragon Ball GTO or GTR or something because it was like a sequel to Dragon Ball GT, which I knew nothing about because it was like not really out in America yet. So I basically was writing a sequel to a story I didn't even know. But that was my very first story, and I finished it. So the very first story I wrote, I finished 12 whole pages. And then I cut out pieces of cardboard. I drew my own cover and back cover, pasted it onto the cardboard, put string in through the hoops in the holes on the paper, and through the cardboard, making my own hardcover book. And I wish I still had it. I kept that for a really long time, up until like 18, 19, and then I had to do a bunch of moving around, and in that process somewhere it did not make it through, I don't think. So sadly, I do not have that book anymore, but I wish I did because I would show it off right now. But yeah, that was the thing. I fell in love with writing, and I've been writing ever since, basically. But after that Dragon Ball fanfic, I basically started writing my own Redwall fanfic. And the very first Redwall book, I forget like a lot of the names and stuff, but I remember the big bad of the first Redwall book was like a giant snake. And then in my fanfic, I wrote that snake returns, basically, had like a scar on its eye, and they had to fight the snake again. I was writing that, and I drew my own cover for that too. But that story I never continued. I never actually finished. It was just a start, basically. I kept reading Redwall in this time frame. I would go to the library. My mom would actually take me to the library, and I would pick up a Redwall book, read it. We'd go back to the library, get another Redwall book, I'd read it, and eventually disaster struck. I remember this book was Lord Brocktree, and our young dog at the time got a hold of the book and destroyed the hardcover. And some of the pages were chewed on. I don't think the pages were ripped out or anything, but the cover was definitely pretty mangled. And at the time I was young, and I was afraid to return the book. And for some reason my mom never pried. Maybe she just didn't think about it. But I had the book for a long time, and eventually I did end up taking it back, probably from like feeling too guilty for still having it. And I took it into the library, set it onto the table, and walked out. And I was just like, I never returned to the library for a long time after that, and I did not read for a long time after that because of that. And it's a bit unfortunate. But I also played a lot of video games at the time, and video games are also known for having some awesome stories. I played a lot of RPGs, JRPGs. I played a lot of the Final Fantasy games. Kingdom Hearts was my favorite game. I played all the way through Legend of Dragoon, and after I played that game, I started to write my own story for a video game. Like, I started like writing out the characters. I drew the characters, because back then, like all the JRPGs and stuff, they would have the manual, and the manual would have the character sheets, and it like had all their stats and stuff, like their name, their age, their height, all that stuff. And I loved looking at those, so I basically started to do that for my own JRPG like game. And I remember it's very typical story. I think the Legend of the Dragoon starts this way and everything, where it's like farm boy beginning and everything, and the village gets burned down and stuff like that. And I was basically writing a very typical story like that, but I had my characters and their own character sheets and their weapons of choice and everything. And I do not remember what I called that, but I remember doing it. And then eventually I played Kingdom Hearts 2, and I loved Kingdom Hearts 2. And like a couple years went by, and we didn't get Kingdom Hearts 3. So I started to write my own Kingdom Hearts 3. I remember at the time, I don't know, like, Disney did not buy Fox for a really long time. But for some reason at the time, I was doing like the Simpsons world and so I think it was like a rumor, like way back then, even, that they were going to buy Fox. This was like years and years before it even happened. But I didn't know that they bought Pixar, and I did my own like Toy Story world and everything. So I basically, with these games, I was basically outlining. I did not actually like write a story. I was just writing what the story would be. So I was just outlining. But I loved the process of outlining, making up the worlds and everything, and it was really fun thinking up like the Simpsons world, Toy Story world, Star Wars world. Yeah, it's cool. I don't think Star Wars world was a thing at the time. Maybe not, but yeah. And as we keep going into high school and stuff, start a band. Well, I don't start a band, but I get asked to join a band, and then I start writing a bunch of lyrics and stuff. And I was not a singer, and our singer at the time wrote his own lyrics, but I basically wrote. I got into like poetry and stuff, and I was basically writing lyrics, and I wasn't being like a very hardcore poet and stuff. But I remember turning in a poem to, at the time it was probably like poems.com or something, and I got it published in there, and it was very simple. It's just like you send a poem, it's published. There you go. But I don't know if you can find that still or not, but I remember posting it up there, and they had like some like blog or something, and they'd be like, "Oh, we love your poem. That's awesome. Thank you for sending it in." Yeah. And people would check it out and stuff. But yeah, I would write lyrics, is what I would call mostly, and I would draw my own comic strips. I remember drawing a comic strip for a made up band called Anvil. And I remember one, it was basically a story about not stealing things, I guess you could say, because he's like looking at a guitar inside of a window, window shopping. And then he's like, "Yeah, I want that guitar." So he throws a cinder block through the window, and it smashes the guitar, and then he gets arrested. And I was like, huh. But these comic strips, I drew like stick figures and stuff. I did not go very, very detailed with them at all. Drawing is not a skill I have honed. At one point in like grade school, I was actually pretty good for my age, but yeah, as I said, I did not hone my skill, so I am not the greatest artist. So, with writing my own outlines for like RPGs and stuff, for a little bit there, I thought I wanted to go into video game creation, and so I went into graphic design. I think it was graphic design. It was a class in high school, but I went to it, and literally like the first day they talked about what we would be doing, and I was like, I got scared out basically. Like they were like, "This is going to be really hard," and I was like, "Yeah, this looks really hard." And that is not really what I wanted to do anyway. I wanted to make the stories for video games, not actually create the video games. So I ended up dropping out of that class and never pursued going into stories for video games. But while we were in high school, the Twilight craze happened, and I actually had a friend that was reading it, and he was like, "You got to read this too." And I think he basically just wanted another guy friend to actually read Twilight so he could talk to somebody about it or something. So he let me borrow Twilight. I read Twilight, and I read all of them. After Lord Brocktree, I think that was the first book I read, was Twilight. And I never even finished Lord Brocktree. Whenever it got damaged, I didn't even feel like reading it anymore. But read Twilight, and was doing a lot of stuff with my band and everything. And that was all I read in high school, really. I remember in 12th grade, they had us pick a novel to read and do a project on. And I remember choosing And then there were none from Agatha Christie, and I really enjoyed that. It was fun to just read a nice mystery novel, but I haven't read any other mysteries since. I had fun with that one though, I remember. Yeah, I was in a band and stuff for a while, writing lyrics mostly. That was, and I would still write. I would start to write stories a lot. I remember after I read Twilight, I was like, man, these werewolves could have been much cooler. So I started to write a werewolf novel and did not get very far with it. I started another novel that I called Strong Willed. It was going to be a superhero novel, and basically, people unlocked their superhero abilities by near death experiences. And basically, if you were strong enough willed to live, something in your mind would snap and you would unlock your abilities. And as you can tell from that premise, things could get very dark. But I did not get very far with that novel. There was another like sci-fi novel I started that was basically just alien, so sci-fi horror. And there was another horror novel that I started that I guess has some similarities with Donnie Darko, but I've never even watched that movie. The horror novel, there's like a bunny person talking to him and stuff. I've seen like the images of Donnie Darko, and I was like, that seems like it was probably similar to the story I was thinking of. And then, while I was doing band stuff and everything, one of my band members had me borrow The Hunger Games. And I read through The Hunger Games, and then I read through Catching Fire, and I really enjoyed them. And he also had me borrow Mockingjay, but for some reason, I never actually opened Mockingjay. I don't know what happened. I enjoyed the first two books, and then I just never read the third one. And so we move on from there. So Batman Begins is a thing, and then The Dark Knight. I absolutely loved The Dark Knight. And then I played Arkham Asylum, loved Arkham Asylum. Then I played Arkham City, loved Arkham City. And then after all that, I decided to start writing my own Batman script for a trilogy. And I've like never done like screenplays or anything like that, but I started writing a script. I wrote like the characters I would want and everything, and which characters would move throughout which movie and stuff and everything like that. So I started outlining that. It was going to be Hush was going to be one of the main villains, and it's going to go follow Tommy Elliott and Bruce Wayne's story basically. And I was going to include like my favorite characters like Poison Ivy and Catwoman, of course. Every movie has Catwoman though, so that's like kind of less cool, I guess. But of course, she's a fan favorite for a reason. She's an awesome character. But after that, like you could see a lot of DC pops and stuff behind me. My friends saw that I was like so into it that I was starting to write my own script and stuff, that they're like, oh, he really likes Batman. Let's start getting him gifts. So a lot of my Batman stuff back here was actually gifted to me from friends. So yeah, that's basically the origin of all this Batman stuff. But yeah, I ended up buying the Court of Owls comics after that. I read the first one and I haven't finished. I haven't continued. It's another very much like the Hunger Games. I read it and liked it and got the next book, but didn't continue for some reason. I think it's like mainly because I was part of a band, and that was basically what most of my time went into. But eventually the band thing stopped being a thing. We did the moving around and stuff. So eventually I decided I wanted to start going to the library again. So I went back I decided I was gonna pay whatever fee I might have for a really late destroyed book and start getting books again. So I went and talked to the lady at the counter. I was like, I'm here to get a new library card. I might have a late fee and destroyed book that I might have to pay for. And they looked at the system and they were like, basically, I don't remember exactly what was said, but they were basically like, it's your lucky day. You have nothing on the system, so we have to redo your card and everything. So I didn't have to pay any late fee or anything, and I got a new card and started getting books again. I remember starting to read Host because I read all the Twilight books and I was like, all right, let's read this one. I don't remember finishing it, which might mean I never did. I remember reading something else that was YA-ish that was like some boarding school for the gifted. This girl could like see the dead or something. I don't know what it was called or anything. I don't remember if I finished this one either. So I was like basically getting things that were similar, like YA-ish titles like Twilight and Hunger Games. And I was like, I guess I was bouncing off of them. I do remember reading a Star Wars novel and finishing it. I'm blanking on what it's called right now, but it was a Star Wars novel basically in between episodes 1 and 2 where Obi-Wan was training Anakin and Anakin made his own lightsaber and stuff. That's what I remember from it. And then I got into Magic the Gathering a lot. I'd go to tournaments and stuff, and I'd do decently well at it. But eventually, I started to get into the Commander format, and eventually, Command Zone started to being a thing on YouTube, and I would watch that a lot. And there was an episode of the Command Zone where Brandon Sanderson had his cube, and they played with his cube on the Command Zone. And at the beginning, they mentioned his book, Mistborn. And I was like, this seems cool. And I didn't read it. I just kept playing Magic the Gathering, doing band stuff, and eventually, somehow, I got into a rabbit hole. I got into the booktube sphere. I don't even remember how, but I started watching in 2019. I started watching Murphy Napier and Daniel Green and all the big booktubers of the time. I think I got into Elliot Brooks at the same time, but I think I might have seen like if they had like Mistborn stuff. Maybe that's how I got into it. But then I would watch a bunch of like reviews and stuff on books and everything, and I wasn't even reading at the time, but I was watching booktube, and eventually I started watching the Brandon Sanderson lectures on writing, and then after that I read Mistborn, and that was just a couple years ago after being watching booktube for a few years. After I read Mistborn, I've fully delved back into reading. And this whole time I've been writing off and on. I do a bunch of starts and never finish. Except for the very first story I wrote was the one I finished. But yeah. Same as a lot of people right now, Mistborn is what pulled me back into reading. And I've read a lot from Sanderson now. And that basically shows you my whole reading and writing story. There's some like writing that I didn't get into, like I did like some short stories here and there that was basically just random stuff. There was a time where there was a girl I was interested in, and I literally wrote her a short story every night before bed, but that ended up not working out and stuff, and I haven't done it since. That was a lot of work. but yeah, I fully delved back into reading and writing. I actually just finished the first draft for my fantasy novel, very first fantasy full-length novel, and I am super happy with how it turned out. I am very happy that I've started reading again, and as you can tell by the books that I've mentioned, I am not super well read. I have a lot of holes in my reading, and that is what I plan my next video to be, is my priority reads. What series do I really want to get into? Which ones are the highest on my list? And once that video comes out, please check it out, get into the comments, let me know the series that you think I should get into and stuff like that. But yeah, I started reading and writing again a couple years ago. I started this channel this year. Actually started commenting on other people's channels this year. I was a lurker for a long time. I'm quite introverted, so it was hard for me to actually start commenting on stuff, but I'm very happy I did. I'm very happy to actually start having people to talk about books with, and hopefully I can start getting more well read, and we'll get into that video coming soon, what I really want to read, and then you guys let me know what I need to read besides what I really want to read. And yeah, this video was super fun. I hope you enjoyed it, and that's basically my reading and writing journey. I finished first draft of my novel, very happy. I am currently starting revisions on it, and I'm fully into this. So yeah, let's get connected. Let's talk in the comments. Let me know what you thought of this whole journey. Hopefully it wasn't too discombobulated and I had a little bit of a structure with it. I tried to like script it out with like little one word things to help me, but I feel like my mind still bounced a little bit. But hope you enjoyed it. Like and subscribe if you haven't, and I hope to see you in the next one.